The tragedy of Steve Harvey is that he taught the whole world how to love, yet love itself destroyed him many times over. We remember the radiant smile on the Family Feud stage, the perfectly tailored $5,000 suits, the $45 million annual income, the best-selling book that taught millions of women how to see through men, the 7 children, the beautiful wife, and a media empire so vast that people called him the busiest man in Hollywood. What we don't see is the unspoken pain behind that laughter, a wound carried from childhood that no stage, no applause could ever completely erase. That same man in the suit once slept curled up in a 1976 Ford Tempo, bathed at gas stations and public pools, ate bologna sandwiches to get by, and lived on $50 a week. 3 straight years like that, not in a movie, but in his actual life. The man who wrote Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man to teach women about love is the same man who has been divorced twice, was sued by an ex-wife for $60 million with the accusation that he had destroyed her soul, and was listed on court documents with charges that just reading them makes people shudder: torture, kidnapping, murder. All of that happened while his smile still appeared on national television every day, unshaken, as if suffering were something he could stash in a drawer before stepping into the lights. And now, at 69, his body is sending signals that no amount of laughter can hide. High blood pressure, prediabetes, Sjogren's syndrome, sleep apnea. Yet, he still doesn't dare stop, because he himself has confessed, "I'm running from homelessness. I can never be in that situation again." The man worth $200 million is still running from that broken-down car 35 years later. That laughter has never told the whole story. It is a weapon, a shield, a profession, a mask, and sometimes, in the most private moments, it is a prayer. Behind the most dashing face in American television is a haunting question. How does a man keep making the whole world laugh when his own life is proof that laughter is sometimes just a thin coat of paint over cracks no one is allowed to see? Today we will look through that coat of paint, but before we find the man behind it, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like for Steve Harvey. The boy from Welch? To understand the laughter that conquered the world, we must go back to the place where that voice was once broken. Broderick Stephen Harvey Sr. was born on January 17, 1957, in Welch, McDowell County, West Virginia, a small coal mining town deep in Appalachia. Welch in the 1950s was a dying town. The coal industry was in decline, people were leaving, and those who stayed were mostly black working-class families living day-to-day on their wages. The air was heavy with coal dust, the streets narrow. His father, Jesse Harvey, was one of those miners. Every morning Jesse left home while it was still dark. His hands calloused from rock and metal, his shoulders carrying the entire family through shifts that lasted until exhaustion. Jesse wasn't the type to express love with words. He used presence. Every evening when he returned, no matter how tired, he was still the center of the Harvey family. A quiet stability a child could feel, but wasn't yet old enough to name. Beside Jesse was Elaine Harvey, Steve's mother, a Sunday school teacher at the local Baptist church. If Jesse taught his son that life demanded hard work, Elaine taught him that life had purpose. She passed on to Steve the Christian faith, the belief that God had a plan for everyone, even black children in a coal mining town. But Steve Harvey stuttered from a young age, not the mild kind of stumbling, but the kind that turned every sentence into a battle, every word into an obstacle, every time he opened his mouth in class into an invitation for ridicule. Friends laughed. Teachers looked on with pity. The boy stood there, mouth open, but the sound refusing to come out, or coming out only to get stuck and break midway. The pain of stuttering wasn't just about being unable to communicate. It was the feeling of isolation in a crowd. Steve dealt with that wound the only way he knew: practice. Every day after school, he stood in front of the mirror repeating word after word, forcing his mouth to produce the correct sounds. No one taught him a method. There were no speech therapists in Welch for the son of a black coal miner in the 1960s. He sharpened his voice the way his father sharpened coal underground, through pure force and a refusal to quit. In the mid-1960s, the Harvey family left Welch and moved to Cleveland, Ohio. Steve enrolled at Glenville High School. In a writing assignment, when asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, the stuttering boy wrote that he wanted to be on TV. The teacher called home worried, but Jesse and Elaine didn't extinguish that dream. They didn't promise it would come true, but they didn't kill it either. And sometimes that is all a child needs. After graduating from Glenville in 1974, Steve attended Kent State University and then West Virginia University, where he joined the Omega Psi Phi fraternity. But he never earned a degree because he was searching for something the lecture halls didn't have. From 1975 to 1985 was a decade of failure. He worked as a laborer at the Ford plant in Cleveland, an insurance salesman, a carpet cleaner, a mail carrier for the Federal Post Office, and an amateur boxer. None of those jobs were his. Each attempt only confirmed that he still hadn't found where he belonged. A 28-year-old man lost, walking through one door after another without any of them opening into the right room. The night everything changed. Then the night of October 8, 1985 arrived. Steve Harvey, 28 years old, stepped onto the stage of the Hilarities Comedy Club on East 4th Street in downtown Cleveland. A tiny stage, blinding lights, a single microphone. The boy who once couldn't even say his own name completely in class walked up to that microphone, opened his mouth, and for the first time in 28 years of life made a room full of strangers laugh. With him, not at him. The prize that night was $50, but what Steve Harvey took home was worth more than any paycheck. The certainty that his voice, his ability to make people laugh, could do something no previous job had ever done. Yet the road from hilarities to the brightest stages in America was not easy. It was paved with something Steve Harvey had never been prepared enough to face: total loss. He had married Marcia Harvey in 1980, and by 1982 they welcomed twin daughters Brandy and Carly. He was a husband, a father, the sole financial provider for a family of 4, and he decided to leave it all to pursue comedy. Not leaving a job for a better one, but abandoning stability to chase something that everyone around him except him believed was impossible. Years later, he recalled that moment with his characteristic bluntness. "I had a family. I had twins. I had to take care of them, but I had to grab this opportunity." That sentence sounds brave when read on a page, but in the reality of 1985, it meant Marcia Harvey had to manage alone, raising 2 small children, while her husband disappeared on cross-country trips, performing at tiny comedy clubs, where the pay wasn't even enough to buy a ticket home. The consequences came gradually, and then all at once. Steve was constantly away, income unstable, the distance between husband and wife growing so wide that no words could bridge it. There were accusations that he had an affair, while Marcia was pregnant with their 3rd child, Broderick Harvey Jr. Steve never publicly confirmed or denied it. The only thing confirmed is that in 1994, after 14 years together, Steve and Marcia officially divorced on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. His first family was destroyed, and then everything collapsed. Not collapsed in a metaphorical sense, collapsed in the most literal, raw, and ruthless meaning of the word. The years in the Ford tempo. After the divorce, Steve Harvey became homeless. For 3 full years, roughly from the late 1980s into the early 1990s, the man who would later earn $45 million a year lived in a 1976 Ford Tempo. He slept on the back seat, curled up because the car was too small for his frame. He bathed at gas stations along the highway and snuck into public pools to rinse off. He ate bologna sandwiches, the cheapest kind he could buy, day after day, week after week. His entire life was wrapped up in $50 a week, and some weeks he didn't even have that much. He drove that battered Ford Tempo all across America, from city to city, performing at any club that would let him on stage. There were nights when the whole room had only a handful of people. There were nights he performed just to trade for a hotel room so he wouldn't have to sleep in the car. And there were times when everything was at its absolute worst. He had to steal to survive. He talked about it years later in a voice that neither self-pity nor hid anything. It crushed me. I realized I was completely alone. Crushed. Not hurt. Not sad. Crushed. The way coal is crushed under the ground in Welch. The way a voice is crushed by a stutter. The way a family is crushed by distance. And the moment of hitting the deepest bottom came on a night he has never forgotten. Steve Harvey sat alone. Maybe in the car, maybe on a sidewalk. He never specified, and began to cry. Not crying from exhaustion, but crying because he could no longer see any reason to keep going. Yet, in the middle of that crying, he heard a voice. I sat down and started crying, but a voice came. If you keep going, I will take you places you've never set foot. Like God saying, don't give up, you're almost there. For Steve Harvey, that was not a metaphor. It was faith in the most original sense. The faith Elaine Harvey had passed to him on those Sunday mornings in the Baptist church in Welch. The faith he thought he had forgotten, but that turned out to have been waiting for the exact moment he needed it most to speak up. If faith kept him from sinking, the microphone kept him moving. Those two things, faith and laughter, were all Steve Harvey had during 3 years of homelessness. No home, no family, no money, but God and a stage waiting in the next city. That 1976 Ford Tempo never truly disappeared from his life. Decades later, when he was worth $200 million, when he owned multiple properties and wore suits worth 100 times more than that car, he still admitted, "I'm running from homelessness. I can never be in that situation again. If my show gets canceled, I have 3 others. I don't have free time, but I have 12 jobs." That car is still parked somewhere in his mind. Every morning he wakes up, whether in a mansion or a 5-star hotel, he still hears the sound of that rattling engine. It is not a memory, it is a living ghost. The rise, Apollo, Kings, and Empire. The turning point came in 1990, when Steve entered and won the 2nd annual Johnny Walker National Comedy Search, a nationwide comedy competition that lifted him out of the small club circuit and put him on the radar of the entertainment industry. That victory opened the biggest door of his life. In 1993, Steve Harvey was chosen to host Showtime at the Apollo at the legendary Apollo Theater on 125th Street in Harlem, New York. The Apollo is no ordinary stage. It is the cathedral of African-American entertainment, the place where James Brown once dropped to his knees, where Ella Fitzgerald sang her first song, where the famously tough audience will whistle you off the stage if you don't deserve to stand there. And Steve Harvey, the man who just months earlier had been sleeping in a 1976 Ford Tempo, bathing at gas stations, and eating bologna sandwiches, stepped onto that stage and was not thrown off. He stayed. He conquered. From the moment he stepped onto the Apollo stage in 1993, Steve Harvey entered an upward trajectory that even he could never have imagined. From 1993 to 2000, he hosted the show with a combination of instant comedic reflexes, an innate ability to control crowds, and a stage energy that only someone who had once stood on the edge of the abyss could possess. The energy of a man who knew that every night on stage was a night he did not have to sleep in a car. But the Apollo was only the launch pad. In 1997, Steve, together with 3 colleagues, Cedric the Entertainer, Bernie Mac, and D.L. Hughley, launched the Kings of Comedy Tour, the largest stand-up comedy tour in the history. Lee filmed the tour into the documentary The Original Kings of Comedy, capturing a performance at the Charlotte Coliseum before more than 20,000 spectators. The film grossed over $38 million at the box office and transformed these 4 men from club comedians into cultural icons. Among them, Bernie Mac would pass away forever on August 9, 2008, from pneumonia complications at the age of 50, leaving a void that Harvey never fully got over. Alongside the Kings of Comedy, he already had his own sitcom titled The Steve Harvey Show on the WB network, airing from 1996 to 2002 for a total of 122 episodes across 6 seasons. He played Steve Hightower, a funk musician turned high school teacher, and the show quickly became the most beloved sitcom in the African-American community. In an era when American television severely lacked representation for people of color, The Steve Harvey Show was a home for millions of families, a place where they could see themselves on screen and feel they belonged somewhere in the mainstream cultural picture. When the sitcom ended, Steve did not stop. He did not know how to stop. Starting around 2000, he began hosting The Steve Harvey Morning Show, a morning radio program broadcast on the Premier Network system, covering hundreds of stations across America, quickly becoming the #1 morning radio show among African-American audiences, and bringing in about $20 million a year from radio alone. But that figure came with a price that cannot be measured in money. Steve Harvey woke up between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m. every day for decades straight, with no days off. That schedule would destroy the circadian rhythm of almost anyone. For Steve Harvey, it was simply another wall between him and the Ford Tempo. In 2009, he published Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, and this was when the paradox became sharpest. The man who had failed at 2 marriages, who had been accused of infidelity, wrote a book teaching millions of women how to understand men, and millions of women believed him. The book climbed to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, was adapted into the film Think Like a Man in 2012 that grossed over $96 million at the box office, with the sequel in 2014 adding another $70 million. Why did the world trust a man who had failed at love to teach about love? Perhaps because he did not speak from a position of perfection, he spoke from a position of scars. And scars are sometimes more trustworthy than any diploma. In 2010, Steve took on the role of host of Family Feud, replacing John O'Hurley, and this was the decision that would define the rest of his career. Family Feud before Harvey was a dying game show, ratings declining, format outdated, loyal audience aging without a new generation. Steve stepped in and turned it into something completely different. He brought in the exaggerated facial reactions that became his trademark. Those moments of wide-eyed, open-mouthed turning and walking away when he heard an answer too shocking. Unscripted interactions with contestants, turning every episode into a viral YouTube clip before the word viral had become everyday language. Before Harvey, Family Feud was a game show. After Harvey, it became a comedy show that happened to have a game. Ratings soared, and he became the highest-paid game show host on American television with at least $10 million a year from Family Feud alone. The empire continued to expand without pause. Celebrity Family Feud from 2015, Little Big Shots from 2016, Steve Harvey's Thunderdome in 2017, Judge Steve Harvey in 2022, Family Feud Africa filmed in South Africa from 2020, quickly becoming the #1 show in that country. Each new show was not just another line on a resume. Each new show was another wall between him and the Ford Tempo, another layer of insurance against a fear that $200 million in net worth could not erase. In 2017, he founded Steve Harvey Global, completing the transformation from performer to boss, from talent to brand, from star to entrepreneur who owned his own empire. 7 Daytime Emmys, 14 Knock Image Awards, 4 books, one of them a #1 bestseller, #1 game show, #1 radio, his own company. Looking from the outside, Steve Harvey at the peak of the 2010s was the most perfect American success story, living proof that the American dream is not a myth. But the piled-up awards could not fill the emptiness inside. The schedule of waking at 3 a.m. every day was not discipline, it was obsession. The title Busiest Man in Hollywood was not an honor, it was a symptom. He himself admitted, "I have the title of the busiest man in the entertainment industry, but I'm tired of that title. Now I want to be the smartest man, not the most tired." The Miss Universe disaster. In 2015, Steve Harvey stood at the top of the world. He was chosen to host Miss Universe, the biggest stage on the planet. The ceremony held at the Planet Hollywood Resort in Las Vegas on the night of December 20th, 2015, with more than 1 billion viewers worldwide. This was the moment that should have marked his transition from American television star to international entertainment icon. And then, before all of them, he made the biggest mistake of his career. When the moment came to announce the final results, Steve Harvey looked down at the card in his hand and read the name of Miss Colombia, Ariadna Gutierrez, as the winner. The stage exploded. Gutierrez cried. The crown was placed on her head. Fireworks, tears of joy. And then, a few minutes later, Steve Harvey returned to the stage with a face the whole world would never forget. The face of a man who knew he had just destroyed the most important moment in someone else's life. He had read the wrong name. The real winner was Miss Philippines, Pia Wurtzbach. The crown had to be removed from Gutierrez's head on live global television. The moment of silence stretched across the stage, Gutierrez's face frozen between tears and shock, and Steve Harvey stood there alone, holding the card that had betrayed him, taking responsibility before the entire planet. If there was a moment that was the complete opposite of glory, that night was it. Instead of being applauded by the world, Steve Harvey stood still, watching the whole world laugh in his face. Within a few hours, the internet exploded. Memes flooded every platform. American late-night shows mocked him for weeks. The name Steve Harvey became synonymous with mistake, with humiliation, with live television disaster. He recounted it on Kevin Hart's podcast in 2021, in a voice that still carried the scar. That was the worst week of my life. But this is what set Steve Harvey apart from everyone else. He did not sink, he counterattacked. Within 48 hours after the incident, his name was searched on Google 4 billion times, becoming the most Googled topic in the world. And instead of hiding, he saw opportunity in the wreckage. T-Mobile contacted him and offered, "We want to turn your mistake into something good." An advertising contract was signed. The following year, 2016, Steve Harvey returned to host Miss Universe with a bigger contract than any previous host had ever received. He continued hosting Miss Universe in 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2021. When speaking about the incident at InvestFest years later, he framed it through faith. "I wanted God to make me more famous on a global scale because I saw myself becoming a global businessman." After the Miss Universe incident, within 48 hours, my name was Googled 4 billion times. God increased my global brand. That is the essence of Steve Harvey. The ability to turn every failure into fuel, every humiliation into a springboard. But the tragic layer lies here. When a man is forced to turn every pain into an opportunity, it also means he is never allowed to be weak in public, never allowed simply to hurt without turning that pain into something profitable. The memo and the scandals. Less than 2 years after Miss Universe, the second crisis hit. In May 2017, an internal memo that Steve Harvey had sent to the staff of his talk show leaked and spread across the internet. The content shocked the public. He banned staff from coming to the dressing room unless invited, banned approaching him while he was in the makeup chair, banned stopping to talk when they met him in the hallway, and there was one line in all capital letters: "If you open my door, be prepared to be removed." CNN reported it. New memes flooded in. The nice guy image he had carefully built on Family Feud collapsed in a single day. The public saw a Steve Harvey completely different from the warm, funny man on television, and they did not like what they saw. But Harvey refused to apologize. At the Television Critics Association's summer press tour in 2017, he said flatly, "I am not apologizing for that letter." He explained that the memo had been leaked by a former employee who was not retained when the show moved from Chicago to Los Angeles, that he had been taken advantage of for years because of his easygoing nature, ambushed every time he stepped off the stage. "I can't figure out a way to get from the stage to the dressing room, sit in the makeup chair, or simply eat lunch without someone approaching me." When hearing him speak, the question hangs unanswered. Is this a diva star making unreasonable demands? Or is this an exhausted man trying to protect the last remaining space in a life that no longer has boundaries between public and private? And then, true to Harvey style, he turned the entire scandal into laughter. "I learned 2 things from that email," he told reporters, laughing. His talk show mocking Asian men provoked a fierce backlash from the Asian American community. Harvey had to post a public apology on Twitter on January 17, 2017. And before that, his private meeting with President Donald Trump at Trump Tower caused even his most loyal and largest audience, the African American community, to turn against him and criticize him. Harvey later admitted to The Hollywood Reporter, "I haven't spoken to him since then," acknowledging that the intense reaction had surprised and hurt him. Looking back, all of these crises, Miss Universe 2015, the 2017 memo, the comments about Asians, the meeting with Trump, reveal the same truth. Steve Harvey's public image was never safe. He is not a star protected by an inviolable halo. He built that image with his own hands, brick by brick, from the Ford Tempo to the Apollo stage to Family Feud, and every time he finished building it, the world found a way to knock it down. But he always rebuilt. Always.